Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have you with us today. I'm Lauren Henry, Executive Director of U Chicago Alumni and a proud alumna of the college. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's panel, More Than an Athlete, Identity, Purpose, and Mental Health. Today's conversation is part of our Homecoming Week festivities, during which we welcome alumni and friends back to the university, our intellectual home, and celebrate our student athletes, and today, our alumni athletes. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion about how athletic participation shapes personal and professional identities. It's my pleasure not only to welcome you, but also to introduce the moderator for today's panel, Angie Torain. Angie is the Director of Athletics and Recreation at the university, leading a department that sponsors 20 varsity sports, nearly 40 sports clubs, an intramural sports program with thousands of student participants annually, Go Rickert, and the Fit Chicago program. Since Angie became athletics director in 2021, the Maroons have won multiple conference championships and national titles. And for me personally, I have the privilege of working with Angie regularly and seeing her strong support and advocacy for our students and alumni, which I think we all see today by the fact that she's here with us for this conversation. So, Angie, thank you so much for being here. We're thrilled to have you lead this conversation, and I will turn the virtual stage over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much for this space and this time with our alums. We're so excited. It's going to be a truly fun conversation. So, good afternoon, everyone. I am honored to welcome our panelists. Our first panelist is Sarah Ray Hallman. Sarah graduated from the college in 1995 with a degree in sociology, then went on to earn a master's in sociology in 2001 and a PhD in 2004. During her time at the university, she was a member of the women's track and cross country team and is also a member of the Athletics Hall of Fame. Elizabeth Liz Lawton. Hi there, Liz. Liz graduated from the college in 2011 with a degree in biological sciences and was a member of the women's track and field team during her time at the university. In 2010, she became an NCAA national champion. And last but not least, Nora McConnell Johnson. Hi, Nora. Nora received her Master's of Public Policy from the Harris School in 2021. During her time with the university from 2021 to 2024, Nora was one of the head coaches of the women's rugby team and led that team to a championship in 2022. Additionally, Nora is also one of the owners of Babe Sports Bar, a new sports bar located in Logan Square by women for women. Awesome. So I am surrounded by greatness today. It's so exciting. It's so exciting. So welcome, Sarah, Liz, and Nora. So as you know, I'm going to fire some questions at you all, get a little bit of your story, and then we'll open it up for Q&A towards the end. So we're talking about identity here. So let's start off with a question for all of you, and we'll start with Liz first, but here's the question. How can we help normalize conversations about identity and mental health in sports, culture, especially when it comes to navigating moments of failure and setbacks that can often challenge a sense of purpose?
So I think we can start by humanizing athletes and kind of steer away from the revered form of the best athletes being those who work the hardest, dedicate themselves entirely, put everything on the line, and get back immediately when they fall. I think all those are contributing factors and often necessary factors that contribute to a successful athlete and post-graduation, a successful professional. But athletes need to be able to cultivate parts of their persona that don't involve sports, be allowed and expected to take downtime, normalize and support off years and years that just things aren't clicking, and realize it's inhuman to push in one area of your life 100% 24/7. U Chicago students and athletes are often historical top performers who put the pedal to the metal and have the endurance to do that all the time. But by discussing how real the impact of mental and emotional burnout can be on the physical aspects of athletics, it may allow athletes to understand that balance is a positive contributor to an ultimately positive sport experience. I really do think by encouraging and celebrating the non-athletic parts of life and letting athletes value that importance will bring identity and build a life that's more sustainable, especially after college.
Absolutely, Liz. I think that's what's the great thing about the Division III philosophy, right? When you come to be a student athlete at a Division III institution, that is the whole purpose, is to have that holistic approach and be able to do those different things other than, athletics. But Nora, like you were leading a very competitive club team. They weren't even, they weren't, I'm sure they were varsity athletes in high school, but they were at a, doing this from a club perspective. How would you answer this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is such an interesting question for U Chicago undergrads, especially. I only went to U Chicago as a grad student, and so I think I went to a really intense, rigorous undergrad as well. But we also, at my undergrad, like prioritized fun. And I think that that is different at U Chicago undergrad. And so I do think that one of the things that's been happening in sports in the last few years has been, I think, seeing athletes as we talked about, like holistic for them and their lives, but also seeing athletes as a holistic with a holistic view. So thinking about not just how they're doing in the gym or just at their drills at practice, but also how they're doing mentally and how they're doing just as humans themselves. And I think I really would credit like the rise of women's sports and the rise of us prioritizing the importance of women's sports to also that new view or better view of thinking about athletes as a whole human and not just what they do on the field or on the court, and actually recognizing that what's going on for them mentally, emotionally, structurally in their lives outside of practice and outside of the games is just as important. I know that I had students who were undergrads and facing really intense academic expectations. And then also, I had students who were on full ride scholarships who were experiencing hardships with their families and just thinking about like the distraction of course, being worried about what's going on with your family while you're trying to be a 20-year-old who's managing really intense academic expectations. It's really important to think about how we are approaching people, young people especially, with their mental health first, because if that's not there and if they're not feeling stable there, then they're not going to be able to perform on a field or at practice, and it's just going to keep hurting them. And I think the priority of mental health for athletes and everyone, but athletes especially, is such a good new thing that we're doing, and I think it's just especially important at a place like U Chicago.
Absolutely. Sarah, I mean, you've got to experience this as a student athlete at U Chicago, but you also have children who are athletes now, which is totally different in those times and when you were competing, but same things. Can you talk about this question as well?
Yeah, absolutely, Angie. And I just want to build on some of the themes that Liz and Nora have already put forward. When I think about this question about normalizing conversations about identity and mental health, I put several lenses on it. I mean, certainly my experiences as an athlete at the University of Chicago, which were so critical and central to my experiences as a college student generally, but also the years that I spent as a college professor at University of Chicago and continue to do advising and mentoring of young people, both in undergrad and grad school, but also, as they begin their careers. And as a parent, as you said, of two teenagers who are both high school and college athletes. And I think, one of the things that strikes me, I think Liz and Nora, you both focused on the individual aspects of this, but I also think normalizing conversations about identity and mental health is a collective responsibility. So actually focusing on building institutional culture, team culture, university culture that makes space for this. And so I think the best way to embody having identity and mental health at the center, we have to think about ourselves as individuals, but also the perspective of the coaches, of parents, of you as the athletic director, Angie, as the professors at the university. Are we all kind of singing from the same hymnal that thinking about mental health and thinking about identity is critical to success? And so I think the combination of encouraging our athletes to think about this from the perspective of their own individual seat, but also asking the question, how can we build a culture in which it's okay to raise these issues collectively across the institution is really important to embedding it in kind of our philosophy within the college at UChicago.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Liz, I wanna get to kind of a more personal question for you. So, what was the biggest challenge that you experienced while redefining your identity after your athletic career, particularly following that national championship in 2010?
Yeah, I mean, I was very blessed to have an incredible running career at Chicago, where everyone knew me as a great runner. And I had more to me on campus, of course. I loved my friends and I loved my education. And I had a great college experience. But the identity I presented most often was that of a serious distance runner. And the athletic bubble at UChicago is definitely a warm and fuzzy family vibe that gets quite comfortable. And one of the more jarring realizations I had leaving college was that no one knew me. No one cared what I ran in college, or how well I did, or what it meant to win a big meet. The sport that I spent 3/4, 4 years of my life just kind of vanished. And it was a void that kind of was really challenging, that I figuring out how to fill it, how to repurpose everything I learned in college through college athletics. And it was really daunting. I felt like it was all of a sudden just gone. But kind of it was the loss of like meets to plan for, goals to chart out, that kind of purpose you have. At first, it felt a bit freeing. I think that I have some other athletes who they're like, "Oh my God, thank God I don't have to think preseason." Like it's nice a little bit at first, but then once it wore off, there was an emptiness. And I'm really lucky that my college sport, because I ran the 5K and 10K, it almost directly translates into marathoning, for better or for worse for my knees. So I did have something to jump right into and honestly, it's been huge in giving me back a goal to live for and something to work for, something to show up for every day, even if I don't feel the best, and that physical training. So that has been huge. But the purpose and identity of who I was, I absolutely had to rebuild. My career has filled a huge part of this, but on theme with this whole talk, I wasn't the most well-rounded in college with regards to my identity. Mental health in 2010 probably wasn't what it is now. And that not being so well-rounded was a bit of a problem for me. So after college, I got to reset and kind of figure out some of the root of like mental health struggles, which was not having this well-rounded kind of persona. And in my 20s and 30s, I actively worked to kind of find out the post-college Liz that was more well-rounded, because as we'll talk about, I'm sure, when certain aspects of your life are not working or not serving you, you do need other aspects in order to not kind of hyper focusing on one, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So you didn't show up with on your first job with the medal and the trophy?
I tried to, but apparently no one cares. My track spikes on, just making a whole mess.
Right, right. Okay. Um, well, to that question, to that answer, Liz, that you just gave us, how can institutions best support student athletes in preparing for life after sports emotionally and mentally? Um, Liz, you can start and then we'll go around the horn.
Yeah, I think that a lot of institutions they can preemptively start talking about kind of what the challenges will be post college, and start giving you. I mean, it's sad to say like that. As depressing as it is, the conversation kind of has to be had that the transition is going to be hard. That a lot of your daily, weekly, monthly, yearly cycle will soon be gone, and it's hard to have. It's not it's a sad topic, and I think some people are ready to end their athletic career for sure, but others definitely want to cherish it. And every athlete, I think, to some degree, will face that cold reality that people don't really care as much, and your employers won't really give you an extra gold star because of what you did beforehand. So I think preparing athletes that they preemptively should start looking at other areas of their life if they find fulfillment, be it charity, marathoning, proactively getting into fitness outside college, because that endorphin high that you have and that chase of goals, it's not going to go away. So talking about like different, like I have friends who got very much into extracurriculars or these cycling groups and whatnot. And I think the main thing is to give athletes a voice, that this is a totally normal feeling to have in a support network, because I do know sometimes when you leave college, everyone is inundated with their first job. And you can easily feel like the odd man out, or feel like, what is this sudden dull feeling I have? And by identifying it preemptively, being like, you might feel like all of a sudden there's just an emptiness. People won't feel like they're all alone, or that they won't be able to kind of quantify it, you know?
Sarah, how did you make that transition, or how should we as institutions think about that now, for our athletes?
It's a really good question. And, I started thinking about this from the perspective of like the bookends of what it's like when you're coming in to be a brand new athlete for the first time at the college level, to what it's like on the back bookend, when you're transitioning into the rest of your adult life. And I think that there's actually a lot of kind of similar skills that you need in transitioning in as you do as in transitioning out. So in some ways, I like to think of this as almost like a bookend question. And so when you think about like the first time you step on campus, I mean, I remember coming to campus as a preseason athlete, cross country, straight out of high school, no idea what to expect. With this idea of like, well, I was a great high school runner, and so all of this is just going to go so easily and swimmingly for me, right? And then you get on campus, and all of a sudden you realize that there are a lot of people on the team who are, a lot better than you. They're a lot more seasoned than you are. They understand more the grind of college academics and how you have to structure your athletic time around and through that. And so it's a pretty humbling experience for most people to transition into the college setting in the first place. Similarly, as Liz said, as you're coming out on the back end of that, there's a set of challenges about how you, kind of reorganize your identity now that athletics isn't the center of that, at least not in the same way. And so I think that the skill sets that I would emphasize around this that have been helpful to me is and it's interesting because this is some of what I've been telling my own teenagers in anticipation of the transitions that they are going to have is how do you make this into a conversation about the way you live your life and how your experiences as an athlete all the way through your life, from the time I was a fifth grade track runner running the 400 in grade school to now being a 50 something that's out doing Spartan races or, having to go walking every day instead of running hundreds of miles the way that I used to. And I think what's at the center of all of that is a kind of lifestyle choice that you're making, which is about fitness. And it is about thinking about what you put in your body and the way you care for yourself. And it also is about the relationships that you build around physical activity, with both lifelong friends and new friends that you meet along the way. So I think, like Liz, I would just emphasize that we think about this as a way to set a mindset about a lifestyle and a type of life that we want to lead, and that physical activity and care for our bodies and our souls and our emotional well-being are all wrapped up in a way we choose to live our lives, whether that be coming in at the college level or going out at the college level, or whether that be 30 years later outside of college, which is where I am now in my own life.
No, that's not true. That's not true. Nora, thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, so much of what both Liz and Sarah said resonates, and then also like by virtue of rugby always being a club sport, it's very different, right? Like there was no preseason, like any sort of special like varsity athletics. Like we always have been sort of like regular or like students who play a sport rather than like student athletes. I mean, student athletes, of course, but like it is different when it's a club sport, I think. And so there isn't as much necessarily like prestige. I do think that I have a few friends that were D1 athletes, and hearing about their transition out of like it's just different. So I think that's like first something to name. But it's still an identity that changes, and it's still an identity that by nature of being in college and being on like a tight-knit team, I mean, college, especially like residential small colleges, are such a like gift to the people who are experiencing them. We don't really get to live like that anywhere else in our lives. And so I think first it's about that first question we all talked about, like how do we help young students and athletes think about their identities as greater than the sport or as like integrated into the sport they play. So thinking about how we as leaders of younger athletes are helping them really think about what does their leadership on the team look like, or what does their social role on the team look like, or how are they developing their own sort of personal identities through their time on the team and with you as their adult leader. And then also thinking about for rugby, especially one of the things that I find to be so special about it is just the network that builds and how like since rugby is a bit more of a niche or it used to be a more niche sport, when you knew other rugby players, you really got to like connect into that network. And so I think about my alumni who graduated and went to New York, and I was able to connect them with the New York Rugby Club. And now one of them, Elsa, is like a starting player on this like, highest level team you can play in the United States for women's rugby. And all of the other players who've gone on and found like their regional clubs or their clubs in their places that they've ended up after graduating from U Chicago. And also the folks who don't play rugby anymore but are still finding ways to be plugged in. One of our players who was on the national winning squad, they like live in Ireland now, but they don't play rugby. They do arts things, but they definitely have connected with a group that is very similar to the rugby community that they had at U Chicago. And so I think just like helping as the adults and the leaders or the coaches in these situations, helping the younger people think about how they can take what they really wanted to get from their college athletic experience and build that into whatever the next phase is for them, and really seeing it as like an asset. Like you got to see yourself as this leader in this space. Now you know you're good at that. How can we find you a role that's similar to that or will help you get into that beyond this team or this college experience?
Absolutely. Liz, so how can you honor the pride and meaning of your athletics experience while finding fulfillment in what comes next?
So it was definitely sad leaving college and kind of saying goodbye to like track star Liz, because again, like I'll repeat it 5,000 times. I ultimately knew that most people wouldn't be as excited as my parents were that I won nationals, and they'd say, "Oh, cool," to my college experiences, and didn't really care much beyond that because, and rightfully so. I mean, the past is the past, and now as a real adult in the real world, I have to find a new identity. My college experience I am so proud of and I think of so often. Sometimes in the oh my god, I was so fast, what happened, when I'm doing like I'm killing myself for like a 7:30 mile on a run one day in like the rain anyway. But often I really do use it to remind myself of that I'm capable of greatness. And I think especially any career, I'm an independent contractor, so it really does parallel my career. But that the journey is really long to success and it's always worth it. I try to think back to when I was a freshman, as Sarah was saying, coming in, everyone was so much faster than me. And then kind of seeing what direction I went to. I parallel in my career, I'm in sales, I'm in real estate sales in New York, where I'm a small fish in a massive pond. But I know that in time and with work, every day you might not see the incremental kind of achievements, but then over time it does work, and the daily just checking in every day and just putting in the work does work. So I look at a lot of my daily activities, my positive health habits, my time management, my ability to take a very short and efficient shower, which I learned at U Chicago for athletics, my fitness routine, kind of the ability again to work day in, day out for a long-term goal and keep my eyes on the prize, even though the daily gains are barely perceivable. I really thank my college experience for that. And that's the way you kind of honor it afterwards, is taking it's just who you are as a person. And again, my trophies are all at my parents' house. I do have my track spikes here, which is something to just make me smile. Memories come back, but it's definitely the memories you never forget. But you have to be, I think, with college athletics, kind of okay with closing the chapter and kind of moving on and giving yourself a new goal to look forward to, because I do know some people who stay in the past, and this is a common thread in life, sometimes don't open themselves up to new opportunities. So I think as a college athlete, it is important to kind of honor your chapter, appreciate it, preserve it, and then move on, but know that it's always going to be with you in different parts of your life.
Thank you. So Sarah, so once you transitioned out and did your coaching and became a professor, as a former athlete now leading a major nonprofit organization, how do you see the mindset of an athlete reflected in your approach to your leadership and service?
Yes, absolutely. There's no question that being a college athlete has influenced my approach to leadership in every leadership position, that I've ever had. And probably the current role that I have, which is as the president and CEO of Easter Seals serving Chicagoland and Greater Rockford, what has been the most, I think my time as an athlete was the most influential on this role than any other role that I've had. And the reason for that is I was hired as a turnaround CEO. And so this was an organization that when I was hired as the president and CEO was in really dire circumstances, like $22 million in debt and a line of credit that had been maxed out for 5 years. And we had about $8 million in unpaid bills. And it was just and we had not a lot of cash. In fact, in the first 6 weeks that I was CEO, we got down to only $1,200 on a 70 million operating organization. That's how close we came to bankruptcy. And I found myself really, especially in the beginning of this role about 7 years ago, going back to a lot of the skills that I learned as an athlete, when I was in season all year round, cross country, indoor, outdoor track at University of Chicago. And the first being, actually, I did this morning, I'm getting up at 4:30 in the morning and I'm the first one there in the line at the LA Fitness at 5 a.m. when they open, and there's like 30 other people and we all know each other, right? Because we're always the same people that are in line. That kind of discipline of organizing your schedule in a certain way to be able to fit in all of the athletic and academic pursuits is the way that I've continued, to really organize my life, even this many years away from being a competitive athlete. And so when I'm faced with challenges, I find that physical activity and also the organizing my schedule around that in a disciplined way is an anchor for me. It's an anchor for me to be able to make enough time and space in my calendar to get everything done that needs to be done as a leader. But it also brings a kind of mental peace and an organization around the way that I think about being a leader day in and day out. So I would say, especially in that turnaround experience, those lessons that I learned as a basically year-round 3-sport athlete, the grit, the perseverance, the ability to recover from failure, the kind of scrappiness that it takes to be a turnaround CEO have been really important. The other thing I would point to in my leadership that I think is rooted in my identity as an athlete is vulnerability. I'm very big on that. I look for that in the leaders that I hire. I try to model that to the people who report to me. And the vulnerability being, willing to admit that you've made a mistake. Vulnerability meaning I'm going to tell you when I'm not sure what the answer is or when I feel fearful or concerned about the direction the organization is going. And I do think that vulnerability comes from, for me, having been an athlete and the successes and failures that you experience along the way, and how public failure can be when you're an athlete. There's almost nothing like that, right? I mean, I say that to my son who's a baseball player, and when you're on the mound and you have a bad day pitching, there's not a single person in the entire stadium that isn't looking at you. And I do think that learning from those kind of failures and learning to be vulnerable has been kind of a key anchor for me as a leader.
That's awesome. That is so true. Sarah, I never thought about that, but that is being an athlete, you experience failure, setbacks in front of everybody all the time, right? And that being that comeback kid is something that we as athletes get to, yeah, me too. I was an athlete a long time ago. Get to claim, right? So that's awesome. I love that. Nora, so what similarities do you see between your time coaching athletes and then building a community around for women's sports fans?
Yeah, so I some context is that I just opened Babe Sports Bar in Logan Square, which is a women's sports bar, which means we only play women's sports. We play things other than women's sports, but we specifically don't play men's sports. And we just opened a little over a month ago. And so I am really in this like new chapter. I also came from education, and so business is like is very new for me. But when I have been building this space and doing all of the ideation around it, and then also the hiring, and then also the sort of policies and procedures that we have for how folks engage with our space and what our programming looks like. I mean, the similarities to coaching and playing women's sports it's so rich. There's so much there. The first is just how vital the space is and the need for the spaces. I mean, anyone who's been in a women's athletic space knows how important the spaces are and also how hard they can be to come by or how hard they can be to protect. I know that like every woman athlete has their own story of having to give up their field or practice time to the men's team or being booted from the locker rooms or having to share the locker rooms. Even our professional women's basketball team in Chicago, like they don't even have their own locker rooms right now when they're practicing. And so I just first think about how my time from being a woman athlete my entire life and then also coaching and being a leader in women's athletics has helped me understand so clearly the importance of a space like this and why we as women athletes and just anyone who appreciates women's sports deserves a space where they are held up and respected in the way that they deserve to be. So that is like I would say the biggest first piece that comes from my time as coaching a women's rugby team, playing women's sports is just like the need for this space. And then thinking about the space itself and sort of what we wanted from the community of women's sports fans at Babes, I think so much about just what makes a good team. And Sarah, when vulnerability is something that I think is such an asset to women's sports, especially, yeah, I think about it in rugby when we have to be like so strong and intense, but then also like we get injured, and like we also there's 15 of us on the field at any given moment. So the team dynamics are so important and figuring out how we all work together and how we pull from each other's strengths is so important. So thinking about building the space with new people and having a fresh space, we thought a lot about sort of what the elements of a successful team were, and we wanted those same things to be part of the space. So having sort of rituals of celebration and rituals of recognition for people, making sure that people felt seen, making sure that people on who are on the staff felt like they got to play to their assets. So people got to like do roles that really make sense for them and what they care about and what their experience is, and also is a space for development. So using it as a way for people who wanted to learn more about specifically cocktailing or specifically about how to be a bartender. Like they're getting trained up. That's the vulnerability again, right? Is knowing that everybody is on their own sort of process and journey and helping people get to the goals they have. And then also just really being like fun centered. I think that is something from rugby that really is important is just like we take it really seriously. We go out there and we like hit each other for 80 minutes, but then afterwards we drink beers with the other team. And that is such an important part of this too. And I think like the celebration in sports is something that is so special and can be really like a sort of a rarer thing to get to do with folks and celebrate in that way. And so really pulling those elements into how we wanted people to interact with the space. And then just like, I mean, we have like bleachers in the back because I really wanted people to be able to like come in and group up. And one of the beautiful things that happens is people will come in like two groups of four, and they'll both find themselves on the bleachers. And by the end of the night, those two groups are really chatting and overlapping. And it's like very similar to sort of being at a sports game and sitting around with the people around you and finding that you're all cheering for the same team. And I think that there are elements of sports that are so great for connection and so strong for helping people like find the sense of purpose that we all have found as athletes. But you don't have to be an athlete to be able to be part of a community where you get to like feel a sense of purpose, feel connected to people, feel like you're part of a greater mission. I think that is something that sports has given all of us. And I've really tried to like capture parts of that, even if you're just coming to Babes for one game. My hope is that you get to connect with some people you didn't know before, feel like you're connected to a greater mission or a greater picture than you individually as one person, and also just like have a really fun time and get to really admire the beauty and importance of women's athletics.
That's awesome. I can't wait to come and see it. So hopefully everybody will go. Do we need reservations? Do we pop in?
No, we don't take reservations. The bleachers are first come, first serve. So come on down.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, we got time for a couple more questions before we open it up to the group. So let's see here. So what advice would you give athletes who are unsure about their next steps after collegiate sports? Sarah, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really important question. The next steps are always hard when you're going from where you are to where you're going next. And so I know the first advice I would give, the first thing that I do when I'm taking a next step is reach out to your networks. You know, call your people, talk with them about what you're thinking about, really communicate and collaborate with people that you trust who know you to give you advice about the things that you're thinking about. I think when I think back, especially on my athletics career at U Chicago, what really has changed about the way that I perceive that experience over time is my relationship with my teammates has become increasingly important to me. So, I know that, when I was first leaving college, I thought about the conference championships or the medal that I won, or did I win the meet, or, those types of things. And I obviously valued my teammates, but I think the further we've gotten away from college, the more those relationships are really what stick in my mind as the most important thing that happened to me in U Chicago athletics was running with, training with, laughing and crying with, living with those people. And now I look at them, my college roommates that I competed with, and they're incredible in their own right. Like one of them was the first female head of the American Academy of Surgeons, and one of them is like a premier interior designer now, and one of them has her own, surgery practice with a partner. And so those are the people that I go to when I'm making transitions or life decisions, is trying to get that kind of trusted insight. So that would be my first piece of advice, is really wrap your arms around your people and let them help to guide you and give you advice as you take those next steps. I think the second piece of advice that I have is going, circling back to the very first question, Angie, that you asked, which was really about, the conversation about identity. And I think that it's important, especially as you make your way through life, to figure out what is the essence of the person that I aspire to be. What are the values and the goals that are going to drive the direction that I take? And I think one of the things that served me really well especially in my professional life, is that I have figured out what those things are and have never deviated from them, even when people were telling me, who didn't know me, told me I was making a mistake. So to give you to kind of put vulnerability on display, one of the things that happened to me in my career is that I was offered and accepted a college presidency. And I was pursuing that path because people told me it was the natural next step for me in my career. And, I was able to get one, so I got one. And I knew within about 3 weeks that it was the wrong decision for me. I just could feel that in my gut, that even though this was the logical next step and it was a great accomplishment, that it wasn't the right step. And I had to sit down with, close friends and my family and really figure out, what does it mean for me to back out of this in order to be true to the path that I was supposed to take. And that was an incredibly vulnerable and difficult decision to make. But making that decision both put my life on the course it was meant to be on, and it also affirmed for me exactly what my identity was and where I was meant to contribute in the world, how I was supposed to use my talents. So I think those are my two pieces of advice, as you're navigating to your next step, is number one, use the people around you that you trust to talk with them about that. and also stay true to your path, even if that means you have to make mistakes and course correct along the way.
That's awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for sharing that as well. I'm going to go ahead and jump to our final question so that we can get to the Q&A. So what does it mean to be more than an athlete to you personally? And Nora, we'll start with you.
Sarah, I think thank you for sharing that. Also, it's just like being a college president, I think is the worst job in the world. So great job listening to yourself on that. Maybe not in the world, but it's up there. I think about, and I think vulnerability, I just am so glad you brought up vulnerability because I do think that that is such an important and like integral part of being an athlete that does need to be surfaced and really spotlighted. And I think about that a lot for being more than an athlete too. Like thinking about what it means to my identity to be an athlete and thinking about how I see that in other parts of my life. And so thinking about when I want to like live my life the way that I want to live it, it's so similar to how I am when I'm my best on a team or my best playing a team sport and thinking about those elements for myself and how I carry them through to other parts of my life. And similar to what Sarah was just saying, noticing when there's not a match or noticing when there's friction and thinking about maybe that means it's not the right place for me. Maybe like it's similar to when you're playing a sport. I played team sports, so it's a little, but when you're playing a sport and you're in a position on the team that maybe isn't the right fit for you, thinking about, okay, this is not playing to my assets or this isn't making me feel as comfortable as I can be or as comfortable as I should be. So can I either get support and lean on my network or can I do something for myself personally to make myself better at it or do I just need to change what I'm doing here? And so thinking about those ways that I was as a teammate, thinking about how I can carry those through to my life, that has been where I've found the most success for myself. And then also something that's sort of been like a theme of I think a lot of the things that all three of us have been talking about is just when you're an athlete, and I never saw this so clearly until I was coaching the Chicago women's rugby team, but just the trusting the process and knowing that the season is the length of a season and there's going to be a lot that happens during it. And that means that we have to really be buckled up for that whole ride. And one loss in that season is not the whole story. It's part of the process and making sure that we, as athletes, as coaches, as leaders in those spaces, are keeping our eye on the whole process, but then also thinking about that for ourselves as humans and what the human story of that is. So thinking about when, like Liz, I was thinking about this so much when you were talking about the transition out of being an athlete in college to then post college and what that looks like and seeing it as the ending, but also seeing that in itself as part of the process too, right? And like part of the whole self-identity process and the college athletics as part of your story process and just how we can make that an asset for ourselves and for the younger people who might be part of our lives. And I think for myself, being more than an athlete, what it really means is to really know that I have this whole process of my life, and there are parts of it that are sports and that have been part of being on a team, and those have really pushed me and developed me, and I can pull from those. And also that it's all one but big part of the process. So thinking about how they all fit into each other and how I can like successfully integrate all of those elements from all of those different experiences into one because I know that I'm happiest when I'm like doing the things that are similar to being on a team or playing a sport. But after playing rugby for 15 years, these knees, similar to all those marathons, are not gonna want to do that. So how can I like find that fulfillment and that wholeness in other elements of my life, which seems very similar to team sports, but has a different flavor.
Absolutely. Liz, what does it mean to be more than an athlete to you personally?
So I think when I think of being more than an athlete, and I think that bleeds into being now in my late 30s more than a professional, because at least in New York, everyone identifies you by your job. I like to take a step back and think of all the areas of my life I'm proud of myself that aren't metric based and don't pay the bills. Like I take pride in being a great daughter, a great partner, my fiance. I take pride in being an amazing friend. A creative, a fellow New Yorker, a hobby marathoner, and a mentor. And I think it is so important to have multiple areas of your life where you find importance and they're varied because at any given time, one is not going to be serving you. Example for running, you could be injured one season. I'm in real estate in New York. Interest rates have not been great the last few years. The years change. and now I'm engaged, but dating was not serving me for a while either, and it can be quite an adventure out there. But I think there's so many parts of your life that are out of your control, and being more than an athlete allows it. Like if for athletics you have an injury or it's not a great season or something, you need to pivot your attention to your family or to school. Being more than an athlete means you can easily shift your attention and to another part of your life when one's not fulfilling you, and your self-worth is still maintained, you're still feeling fulfilled, and that you have a net happy life. Because sometimes when you're just an athlete, if things are not going the way they should be in an athletic season, it can be pretty lonely and you can not have something else you can find happiness from.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Okay, I'm gonna try to get a couple of these questions in before we end today. So, question number one, what advice would you give to current student athletes who are struggling with balancing identity, purpose, and mental health? And so, Sarah, we'll start with you since you didn't get the answer to the last one. How about that?
Oh, that sounds great. Um, I think the advice that I would give, and in some ways this weaves back into the conversation or the question that you just asked, Angie, as well, is that, I think as I've gotten older, I've come to value balance in a different kind of way. So if I think about my athletic career, and obviously I still see myself as an athlete, I'm not competing in the same way as I was, when I was younger, but obviously athletics is still, and physical activity is still a really important part of my life. But what I will say is I've become more attentive over time to the fact that you as a person have wrapped up inside of yourself, physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional needs. And that sometimes they're not in balance with one another, and sometimes the physical is compromised in some way. So for instance, I had to have a recent surgery that kind of, set me back, and I wasn't allowed to like exercise my core for 8 weeks, which felt at the moment the doctor told me that my world was literally going to come to an end if I couldn't, get up and do my run and do my weights and exercise my core in the same way. But I really think I would emphasize in answer to that question the value of seeking balance and seeing that finding balance is a really key part to maintaining all the different aspects of health that you need, your physical health, mental, spiritual, and emotional health. So I think that would be my advice, is to seek that and to think about that and to think about all of those aspects of your being and the health around those to be of equal importance to your physical health.
Thank you. Liz, I'll give this question to you. Do you ever feel tension between your athlete identity and other parts of who you are? And if so, how did you navigate that?
Yeah, so in college, it was definitely challenging just because, I mean, U Chicago is the most rigorous education, and there's definitely no way around that. And I think like I struggled with how to do everything all at once. And I think that's something that's a theme in life. As you get older, well, you get more things in your plate. And I think how there's mantras. I believe in mantras every day, because sometimes you can get so wrapped up and so overwhelmed with what's going on to stop and kind of remind yourself a few things. I think giving yourself grace is really important, and taking time to stop and breathe sometimes. I think at U Chicago, with athletics, with academics, comparison is also something that you have to be really careful of. And I think with track, comparison is very black and white with numbers. I mean, you're either fast or you're not, and your times from last year are very compared to the times from the year now, and like where you want to go. So I think U Chicago, I think as a student athlete, you do have to be very, very aware of comparison, of letting yourself breathe and giving yourself grace. I think when I was an athlete, when I would get overwhelmed, I think it's really important to remind yourself at Chicago again that you're here ultimately to grow from age 18 to 22, to experience life and to enjoy Chicago, and to have a great education and to build these relationships. And when I would get very overwhelmed with what was going on in my life or academics or school, I tried my best to either get coffee with a friend, just to remove myself from everything to take time to breathe. If there was a party at a frat that looked like it was fun, and it's either that or to spend more hours studying, it's like, you know what, this is going to be a fun night that be able to just breathe, and I won't be an athlete, I won't be a student, just to breathe. I think that sometimes it takes taking a step back to remind yourself that you're in college ultimately to grow as a human being, and you're your own worst critic, your own harshest critic, and to just focus on the relationships, focus on the journey, which again is easier said than done, especially Chicago gives you no time to breathe with regards to academics and athletics. But just to have some mantras to remind yourself to give yourself grace. Comparison is a theft of joy, and remind yourself that you're doing great and the people who love you are supporting you, and ultimately everything kind of works out in the long run. So just to take a second to breathe, which I know as a UChicago student is really hard to do, but it's so important.
That's great advice, Liz. Um, Nora, what steps did you take? Oh, they moved the question on me. Hold on. See if I can get back to it. Here we go. What steps did you take to find a career slash passion post being a student athlete?
Yeah, I mean, I ended up teaching after graduation. So I did Teach for America, and I was teaching in New Orleans for 7 years. And I see so many similarities with that and being a student athlete, like just the thinking about the process and the grind and the resilience and the vulnerability and thinking about how you really have to dig deep to make it. And I think also just what I always pulled from with being a student athlete and from then on, how I've sort of moved through life has really been, and this is so similar to what both Sarah and Liz were just saying, but just leaning into my network and thinking about who I can go to, both either for advice, for support, who I like peers who I know have gone through similar things that I have or on similar paths that I have, former coaches. I also have gotten to be that for a lot of my U Chicago alumni, and I think that is such a, I know not all of us get to have coaches who we want to go to for that or for vulnerability or for support, but if you do, just that relationship is so incredible. I think all of us have, I'm sure, had coaches who we consider like pivotal people in our lives. And so really going to those people and remembering that just because they coached you on one specific sport or for a specific period of your life, it doesn't mean that you can't still go to them for other leadership support later on. And really just like pulling the elements that helped me as a student athlete succeed, really using those similar to what Liz was just saying about like stepping back and thinking like, how can I address myself as just a human first, and then that will help me in whatever the sort of needed aspects are. And I think that really just like leaning on the network and leaning on those mentors or the peers or the adults or older folks in my life who I could go to has been so that is how I've gotten through any hard part of my life. And I really think that started with my time in sports.
Yeah, no, I think that is great advice. I always get folks sometimes who ask me, like, how do I get in college athletics? And I was like, the first thing you do is you got people right there that's working in the department that you could go to and ask, what is your job? What do you do? You know, so when you talk about network and using your coaches, like what a great built-in network for you as you try to navigate your career. All right, question number 4. This is a good one. How do shared experiences in athletics create empathy or understanding across disciplines and generations? Sarah, you want to try that one?
I love that question. I'll tell you why I love that question, Angie. I love it because I think I've spent my life and my career as a boundary crosser, and actually, I think early in my career, uncomfortably so, because people aren't always comfortable with people that don't fit in the lane lines. This is one credit that I will give to the current generation. So, the young people who are in the college right now is they are just naturally, I think, a lot of them live across boundaries in a healthy way. They don't like to have lines put around them. But that wasn't always, it wasn't always the case. And so I think that finding opportunities to cross lines that other people don't cross is really important. And so, I encourage at the college level, like when I was a professor, when I would talk to students, I would encourage them to cross out of their comfort zone into other parts of campus or other, social groups that they'd never been a part of before. So if you're an athlete and you see your identity as being an athlete, what else are you doing on campus to get to know students that aren't in that little bubble that you live in? If you're kind of the a cappella singer, and you're kind of in the music groove at the university, what are you doing to cross into other thresholds and across other spaces, that can give you different exposure to different groups of people who value different things and think about their experiences differently. So I actually think that ability to kind of cross through different social groups, different professional groups, for me has been the most defining part of my career, to be able to kind of span into spaces that most people, don't cross. So I guess that's the kind of my response would be do that intentionally, explore that while you're still a college student. Challenge your own thinking about what your identity is and where you think you're going by surrounding yourself with people who are on a completely different path and thinking about things in a different way. And I think athletics is a great lever to allow you to do that. And to just encourage and embrace that across the rest of your life through your relationships and career.
Awesome. Okay, I think I have one last question. How do you continue to define the idea of winning for yourself now? And did you have to redefine that definition? Liz?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in real estate sales, so my job is like very much metric based. I do think winning, you to redefine it, obviously, like it's being the best in a small pond, or being the best in your team, the best in NCAA, it's great. But once you get to the real world, the best is really it's really great. Like it's the best performer in New York real estate is selling. I don't even know, it's an obscene amount of money and an obscene amount of sales. So I think it's being winning for your own self and start and finding your own metric of what is success. And for me, like I'm not a yearly goal maker. I kind of try to be better than I was yesterday, and that's winning. It's on a macro level. I think even with talking about before, different parts of your life won't serve you. I mean, some years in real estate are not going to be better than others, and that's any job. Different sectors have ebbs and flows. So for me, it's my personal idea of a winning is that at the end of the day, if I put my best foot forward, and no matter what was my legs were working running that day, like got out and ran. If I had a buyer that day or a seller that day and I went in the showing, didn't work out, I was my best professional self, best for my friends and whatnot. At the end of the day, when I'm lying in bed, my eyes are closed, I can say that I brought my best foot forward that day. And that has to be winning, because I think in college you are in a little bit of a fish pond. Once you get into the real world, there's a lot more external factors at play. And you have to be okay with the fact that winning might not be beating your sales from the year beforehand, or running the Boston Marathon faster than you ran the year before because it was 80 degrees and like a maximum humidity. Or your friend, like your best friend, might find her fiance or husband at age 26 and you're still dating at 33, 34, and it's brutal. You have to be able to define winning in other ways, because it's just not a straight line. It's not a straight line anytime in life, but really after athletics, it becomes kind of like a more abstract reality.
Yeah, absolutely. That thought process of I did my best today and my best was enough. Right. And that's winning for today. So well, oh my God, you guys gave so many nuggets today. I don't want this conversation to end. I think I could talk to you guys all day, but I guess I have to say goodbye. But thank you so much for your time and for all that you shared with us today. It was really, really good. So now I will welcome Lauren back to the stage.
All right. Thank you so much, Angie. And thank you, Liz, Nora, and Zara, for this wonderful discussion. I think I share Angie's sentiment, which is that I could listen to this conversation for such a long time. But what also struck me in listening is just that we could convene this group on so many topics, which is just such a testament to the multifaceted experiences and expertise that the members of this community possess. I really am taking so much from the conversation, including Nora, the to-do item of submitting a request for an unrivaled draft viewing party at Babes next year. So look for that coming soon through the website. And I, of course, want to thank all of you for joining us as well. If you are in Chicago and looking for more university engagement this week, I hope you'll join us on Thursday evening for a Harper lecture focused on the science of a safer city, or on Saturday for the homecoming block party here on campus. And if you're not in Chicago, there are so many opportunities to engage virtually and in your local community. And you can always learn more at the Alumni and Friends website, which is being shared in the chat. I see it popping up. So most importantly, thank you all again so much, and have a wonderful rest of your week.